Unless you're some weird, kinky bastard, no one likes being frustrated. But some struggle is good for you. It gives an experience texture. Without it, nothing would be memorable. This isn't a discussion on what makes a good game versus a bad game. This is why a good game has to annoy you, at least a little bit for it to be remarkable. Ego-syntonic versus ego-dystonic. Ego-syntonic basically means that what you're met by conforms to what you agree with, and its opposite, ego-dystonic, is the inverse. It's when you're challenged by beliefs you disagree with. Obviously, we're all going to have different preferences for what will be syntonic versus dystonic when it comes to the games you play. A frustrating game that gets you to feel ego-dystonic will drive you to quit, while a difficult game that is ego-syntonic will give you a feeling of accomplishment. Let's use competitive Street Fighter for an example. Street Fighter 2 is one of the biggest video games in existence. Everyone and their great-great-grandma knows what a Hadouken is. Heck, she even maybe Hadoukens her slippers at you when you try to drink gamer girl bathwater. I'm not here to judge. Competitive Street Fighter 2's meta is built around putting your opponent in situations where they have little to no options to escape from, giving you specific checkmate situations before the round is even over. If you grew up with this style of minimizing risk and maximizing your reward where it becomes a one-player game at certain points, this will be your perception of honest Street Fighter going forward. If you live long enough to see player backlash for literally every new Street Fighter game ever released, just because of ego-syntonicity. Oh my god, I actually said that right my first try. Every Street Fighter game plays dramatically differently from one another. I'm not even talking about every new numbered title. People who hate change from a game are experiencing ego-dystonicity, which is why when the next numbered title released, we were given the parry, a 10 millisecond window to nullify an incoming attack, or a 3 millisecond window to perform a red parry against certain moves. The introduction of the parry mechanic took away from guaranteed lockdown and absolute checkmate situations. Now, you can never count on turning your brain off, as your opponent will always have a counter possible if they have the proper read and execution. If you have a rigid ego that needs hard counters and checkmates, this style of gameplay would drive you over the wall. No longer can you plan everything in advance to maximize your chance at winning when parry gives your opponent an X factor that can nullify even the most airtight strategy. If you have a fluid ego though, your focus will be on adapting to any challenge rather than needing specific challenges you already have a groundwork understanding of. While having a rigid ego will likely get you to stick with the game you like more even if it's outdated, this isn't a moral right or wrong kind of ego. It's just more of a preference thing. You don't have to like every change a game developer makes, but your frustration will be enough to prevent you from being open to change and adapting to new strategies and mechanics. You'll probably have an ego belief that honest Street Fighter is insert qualities related to that specific game you like. Obviously, if the sequel was just more of the same, it would be syntonic instead of dystonic. A fluid ego belief would be closer to, I am competent enough to adapt to new challenges. So even if the changes are new, you're okay with challenges not being how you like them initially. Dude, I can't talk today. Whether you agree with them in the long term or not is a different story. When Street Fighter 6 came out, people loved how they brought back the complexity and some of the execution of older fighting games that Street Fighter V vehemently removed, until the meta evolved and now everyone hates Drive Rush for making decent defense an unholy difficult tactic to employ. Again, just to reiterate, ego-syntonic versus ego-syntonic isn't about if something is good or bad, just how they influence how you experience frustration to change. I hear people hate Tekken 8, but I don't play Tekken, so I don't have the proper insight here. But this is a great example of how being ego-dystonic isn't necessarily a bad thing. From my understanding of the discourse, smart, calculated play is punished while thoughtless aggression is unfairly rewarded, to put it simply. People with strong legacy defensive skills will hate this, and people who are open to change will be open to adapting to it. But having an open ego doesn't mean you have to like everything. The difference between a rigid ego and a fluid ego is, this is not how a game should be designed. This is freaking stupid. The developer should be ashamed for designing this fecal matter. Versus, this is not for me. I'm gonna play something I actually like. I'm sure most of us would like, if anything competitive with $1 million on the line, to promote smart play over gambling on big bets. In short, if a game makes you ego-dystonic, you're probably just better off quitting as you won't receive any emotional benefits from mastery. Trust me, I've met people who hated a specific competitive game and only got good enough to beat other players to tell them their game is garbage while kicking their face in. But since they're good enough to win, they could actually argue how their winning is stupid and isn't any fun. Well, at least for them. But this mindset is pretty awful for community growth and detracts newcomers from sticking around and letting the scene grow. You know, the thing you'd want if you want developers to have a financial reason to continue developing said game. The rest of this video hinges on how even if a game makes your ego syntonic, it still needs to irritate you at least a little bit to go from good to great. I think we all know this, even unconsciously, but going through frustration and difficulty makes an achievement all the more sweeter. I love Gunpla. I mostly build master grades, one of the more difficult and time-consuming model kits. If I just went out to the store and bought a fully built kit, I'd probably admire it for a few minutes, but put it on my shelf and mostly forget about it. I'll walk by it without a care in the world. Since I spent 30 plus hours on most of my kits, sanding off the edges and adding panel lighting to make the form stand out more, every time I walk by one of my kits, I feel a sense of accomplishment. It may not be perfect, it may not be good enough for a competition, but I put my blood, sweat, and tears into these. I spent meticulous amounts of hours googling cool poses from amazing art to inspire how I should pose my Gundams. Every bit of detail, every little posture, I spent hours deliberately trying to fit my style. It feels like it's mine because of the labor I put into it. Something pre-built just wouldn't have the same sentimentality with. One of the best feelings in the world is adrenaline. We have the word adrenaline junkie for a reason. It feels amazing, and for some, it's incredibly addicting. You can't experience adrenaline unless you're in danger. It's when something frustrates you that you get a surge of adrenaline as you feel like you gotta prove a point to overcome a difficult situation. Now, I hope this video doesn't come off as me being anti-cozy games. I love me a good cozy game, but your goals with a game can be different every time you turn on that power button. This video isn't about how to enjoy a game, let alone relax from one. It's about learning how to create a memorable experience that sticks with you. Sadly, most people remember their negative experiences far more than their pleasant ones, and that's because you're more likely to remember a time you're emotionally charged, whether it be good or bad. And I feel like most of us experience the latter drastically more. For example, if you have a good, kinda uneventful job, you probably won't remember much of it. But you have a terrible job, and that's gonna get a pretty big emotional reaction out of you. You'll be able to recall crummy events and vent about it with ease. If you have a coworker you like, you can double the emotional reaction by bonding over your shared struggles together, creating a space for emotionally charged conversations and connection. Because strong emotions tend to build strong connections. But just because they're strong doesn't mean they're healthy. Even in dating, people are more likely to be drawn to emotionally charged relationships than peaceful ones. That's why there's a whole industry out there teaching how to manipulate the other person, put them under enough emotional distress so you can live in their head rent-free and be obsessed over you. The stress of will he or won't she drives people absolutely nuts. People literally lose their will to live over a toxic partner who's hot and cold. It's insane how all someone needs to do is mix frustration with a little excitement to get you addicted to them. You know why this type of dissatisfaction can be so addicting? Also, don't do this to your relationships. I'm just providing an example, but it's an extremely toxic example. Read Attached by Levine and Heller for a healthy approach to relationships. When you're failing something you believe you can genuinely overcome, conflict makes for a great story. If you can get them to change because of you, look at how gratifying that is for your ego, even if it's incredibly humiliating and severely unhealthy to do so. When it comes to a game, it's a lot more interesting to hear a narrative about how it took me 10,000 hours to do this one combo, but it's only 10,000 hours because I've been competing in fighting games for over a decade, when in actuality it took me more about 25 minutes in practice to do this combo. A good story makes for great validation from the people around you. If you can make an engaging story about how you overcame something that frustrated you, people will sing your praises. And you know, this is just an elaborate, drawn out way for me to say, I played Ninja Gaiden 4 on the easiest difficulty, and there's nothing an elitist can say to make me feel bad because my ego no longer gets pleasure from beating hard games. Okay, thanks, bye, love you, have a good life.